Good morning, folks, and welcome. My name is Robert Coulter. I'm the General Manager for Partnerships here at the AFA. I'm delighted to be hosting this morning's session. Very excited to introduce the webinar, The Makings of a Profession, Career and Education Insights for Paraplanners. This is another AFA in practice webinar designed and delivered by advice professionals, so you get first-hand, immediately implementable tools and tips to grow your knowledge and your paraplanning career. Today, I'm delighted you'll hear from Kate Fellows. Kate is the Victorian State Chair of our Pulse Paraplanning community of practice and is also the founding director at the Professional Paraplanner. We've had lots of requests from our members wanting to find out more about paraplanning as a career, and we know Kate will be sharing some very valuable insights today. Having commenced her career straight out of Monash University in the 90s, Kate was keen to become a financial planner. When she asked her cousin, an insurance executive, how she should start, he advised her to get some grey hair and experience in the corporate world first. And that she did. I don't know about the grey hair, Kate. Kate has worked for many large corporates, including Macquarie Bank, Perpetual, AMP, Westpac, CBA. She did eventually try the world of advising, but like many of you, found that her strengths lay in the more technical nature of the role. Now, having run outsourced paraplanning services for the better part of the last decade, Kate is keen to share some of what she has learned on her journey. She hopes to fill a void in the Australian financial planning market for targeted paraplanning educational support, whilst increasing the profile of the paraplanning profession. So before we start, I'd just like to cover off some webinar housekeeping. So today, you'll receive one CPD hour will be available. Now we'll send those details out to you within the next week. We'll also answer questions at the end of the presentation. So please use the Zoom Q&A feature, not the chat feature. You can see it indicated in the slide there, as you can see in the diagram below. Kate, I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. Really looking forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you for putting this important information together to help our members. Let's kick off. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks so much, Rob. I really appreciate that lovely introduction. And welcome everyone today. Thank you for tuning in. I must apologise for the lighting that I have today, but well, really it's just to cover those grey hairs that we were talking about earlier. So what I'm quite keen to talk about this particular topic with you today. It is my passion, and I guess over the last couple of years that I've really been honing my focus on education and advocacy, I've learnt a lot more about what's happening in the role of the professional paraplanner. So today I'm going to look at a few major topics, and the first is the evolution of the role of a paraplanner. I think it's important to understand where we've come from as paraplanners, to know where we are now and where that's headed. I'll also take a look at career opportunities. There's quite a few career opportunities out there now, and they will continue to grow as we head into a more technology state in paraplanning. Education and qualifications is relatively new to paraplanning, and we have a number of different paths that you can take to become a paraplanner. And this is developing quite quickly at the moment. So I'll touch on some of those areas as well. Now, a couple of other things I'd like to cover with you today, and that is how we're supporting you as an industry. What have you got available in terms of tools and education and community to help you in your profession? And lastly, we'll talk about how you can help us in raising the profile of paraplanning as a profession. So let's get started. And I'm going to start in 1998. And in 1998, it's significant to me because it was my first paraplanning role. And I went to work for a AMP advisor who really was an insurance salesperson. And back in 1998, as a paraplanner, you would get what we called an F&A, a financial needs analysis, which was a front and back piece of paper that would give you the client's contact details, a little bit about them, and what the recommendations were. As you can see, we've come a long way since then. But when we started out, it really was sales rep making product recommendations, and as a paraplanner, trying to make an advice document to support those product recommendations. We were advice writers. It was more administrative than it was strategic or research based. Needless to say, I lasted about 3 months in that role, left very disillusioned, and I went back to corporate before spending many years before I tried again. So what have we come to now in terms of paraplanning? For anyone who's done any business studies, you would be familiar with this chart, and that is the theory of supply and demand. And really, since about 2015, give or take a year, there has been a low-level supply of quality paraplanners. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of paraplanners out there, but to pick up a paraplanner, having run an outsourcing business, who has all the skills and knowledge that you need to do every type of advice that an advisor might require, is very hard to come by. There is a huge demand now for outsourced paraplanners. Now, I had 2 paraplanning businesses. The first iteration I started the month after the GFC, and surprisingly it went pretty well, but I was selling not just my services as a business, but I was selling the concept of outsourcing. In the second iteration of my business, after I'd had a couple of children and did a few other things, I came back and found that I wasn't having to sell the concept anymore. There were hundreds of paraplanning services out there. There were onshore, there were offshore, and it was a very different market. That has been a relatively quick progression. And it affects the role of paraplanning, because someone who sits in a contract paraplanning role is quite different to someone who sits in-house with support from their advice practice. They need to have a higher level of skills and experience to allow them to sit in that outsourced model. We have had an increase in the complexity of the advice we're preparing. So that has shaped the people who are attracted to paraplanning and who can do the role as well. Once again, in that first iteration of my paraplanning business, 80% of the SOAs that we were preparing were insurance and super. Flip that around to the second business, and I would say only 20 to 30% were insurance and super. Most of the statements of advice we prepared had a minimum of 3 or 4 advice areas in them. So the work that the paraplanner is now doing is more complex, it's more involved, and thankfully it's more interesting. There's nothing worse than having to pump out one after the other of insurance and super SOAs. Because of that, we're attracting more qualified people, and they're sticking. They're actually hanging around. One of the things we are seeing now, which is a challenge for some of the next steps in terms of education, is the wide disparity between what one paraplanner does and what another paraplanner might do. So for example, you might have a personal assistant in an advisor's practice who does the occasional ROA. They've been taught how to do it. If it's a no change scenario or the advisor does the investment portfolio changes, they can prepare the rest. And they may have the title of a paraplanner. At the other end of the spectrum, you have paraplanners who have 10 years experience, a degree, and are doing detailed strategy and research work that involves complex tax structures and various entities that can take them days to prepare just one statement of advice. So we need to have a think about, as an industry, and we are, what a paraplanner is. I guess because it's a fairly young profession and role, we're still defining that. The best part about recent years, I believe, is that we now have some career paraplanners. Not everybody is using paraplanning as a place to go to get somewhere else, and we'll talk more about that when we look at the careers. So what do we think the role of paraplanning will look like in the future? If anybody is out there researching paraplanning and financial planning and what is happening in our industry, you will notice there is a lot of change on the way. There's a lot of talk about digital advice, machine learning, automation, and this will change the role of the paraplanner. I do get asked quite a lot whether I think this automation will replace paraplanning, and the answer is definitely no. Do I think there will be that wide disparity of paraplanners in the future? Probably not. I think what will happen in the future is the best of the best will survive. Those paraplanners who can do all of the different types of advice and are at that upper echelon of the profession will still have plenty of work to do. Do I think that some of the lower hanging fruit will disappear? Probably. You know, the simple SOAs will be automated. I think we all know that. So as paraplanners, I think if you're committed to spending your career in this field, you need to commit to being the best of the best. There's another area that has been talked about in the last probably 6 to 12 months in the advice industry, and that is specializations. What we're finding is that increasingly advisors are under a lot of pressure and finding it more and more difficult to be generalists. So there's a lot of talk about how we support advisors in becoming specialists in particular areas, such as self-managed super fund advice, for example. If we have advisors that are going to start becoming specialists, so too will that open the pathway, I believe, for paraplanners to do the same. And one of the things we do at the Professional Paraplanner is create different pathways through the education to allow for things like this, to allow for a superannuation specialist or an insurance specialist that doesn't necessarily want to learn about annuities because it's not what they're doing. As I said, there will be automation take over some of that easier, more administrative type work that paraplanning has done in the past. I know that in-house paraplanners, when I say in-house, I mean those in a practice, often have more generalist duties and can include systems and processes and compliance, new business administration, tech champion. So a lot of what they do in that sometimes is partly practice management may be subject to future automation. Lastly, the offshore businesses. Now, I've been speaking to a number of the offshore companies. They contact me quite often to discuss opportunities in Australia. I must admit, in my paraplanning business, all of the major contracts that I had with large AFSLs wanted us to be onshore. So there's definitely still a lot of support for onshore paraplanners. Advisors and AFSLs alike are willing to pay a premium for good quality paraplanning. But it needs to be that. They don't want to pay a premium for the same level of work and service that they could get offshore. In the future, we will see more of the offshore. They are investing a lot of money and time into upskilling and educating the teams that they have over there. And even from the handful that I've spoken to, there are thousands of paraplanners in these offshore companies. Remember too that those people in those offshore companies are very grateful for their opportunity to work in a role like this. So they're really committed to their education and continuing in paraplanning in these companies. So watch this space. I don't think it will take over completely the onshore. If you're onshore, you'll want to be good though. This is giving you a little insight into my humor. I thought if I was talking about career opportunities historically, I could put an antiquated little animation in there. But in any event, when we talk about career opportunities historically in paraplanning, there was no such thing. And paraplanning was a stepping stone to becoming an advisor. That was me, hand on heart, in 1998. I wanted to become a financial advisor. So I thought I would go and be a paraplanner for a little while, and then I would step into advice. This has changed dramatically. And if you look at what is available currently, I've got a few examples up here that I'll talk to, but there are so many opportunities for paraplanners now, and even just within the paraplanning role, I know that a lot of the major AFSLs have now don't have the paraplanning teams that they used to, but I think what you'll see is some of these paraplanning contract companies, we may see a consolidation there, and so you'll see some team leader and paraplanning manager roles come back into the market. Let's have a look at my diagram here, and we've got the in-house versus the contract paraplanner. I wanted to make the distinction between these two roles. It's something that I get asked about a lot with paraplanning. As I mentioned earlier, the in-house paraplanner tends to be more of a generalist. They do prepare statements of advice. They do more of the research that goes with investigating the client's existing position, what recommendations might be made. They get involved in the investment portfolio selections with the advisor, but they do a lot of other things as well. So often they prepare the office for audit. They're responsible for coordinating aspects of the compliance, certainly the systems and processes. Hand up those paraplanners who are the tech champion of their office, and I'm sure there's many of you. So the in-house paraplanner appeals to someone who doesn't want to sit there all day and just produce statements of advice. They actually like the variety of the other elements of the role that are available when you work in a practice. If you want my opinion for what it's worth for new people coming into the industry and wanting to get into paraplanning, in a practice is a great place to start. I think you need to get an appreciation of the advice process from beginning to end to get a well-rounded understanding of the advice and how it's provided. So in-house is a good place to start. The contract paraplanning role tends to be more for someone who's got 2 to 3 years experience as a minimum. And that's because you need to be self-managed. Often many of the businesses, and I know many of the owners out there now still running paraplanning businesses, require you to run your own business through the business. So they're not responsible for your education, your professional development, what your knowledge base is, your ongoing CPD, if that's important to you, that ongoing learning requirement. What you do get involved in terms of the work that's done is the research, you do get involved in some research, strategy development, definitely, and the preparation and of the statement of advice, records of advice, strategy papers. You need to be able to manage your own business, which is an important point. I persisted with my paraplanning business because I really enjoyed the work that we did. I loved my team, and we had a great business. The actual accounting and preparing of BAS statements, still to this day, you know, I do it because I have to. And if I can get a bookkeeper or an accountant to do it for me, I will. But they are some of the aspects you need to consider if you're looking at a career in contract paraplanning. The other part that is often overlooked until recent years are the opportunities in compliance. So you can move into a compliance consulting role. And I'll use Tanya Seal at La Vista, who was previously head of advice at Matrix Financial Planning. She started as a paraplanner. She went into compliance, worked her way up to the head of advice, and is now, I think, pretty much running the operation. Sorry, Todd, if she's not, but that's how most people in compliance start. So if you have an interest in auditing, not my thing, but some people like going out into advisors' offices and looking at the client file and providing support to the advisors on how to meet best practice in advice by doing audits. So that is definitely an opportunity for paraplanners to progress to. The other one that we've seen a lot of in recent times is the remediation work. A couple of years ago, they were paying quite extraordinary day rates for the remediation consultants. I've noticed that they've dropped back by about a third in recent times. Maybe there's not as much work anymore, which is a good thing for the industry. But certainly, I think the remediation work can be really good for someone who is learning. So if you want to see how the advice shouldn't be done, you can go and work on a remediation project. You'll basically get given a set of standards, and you'll have to go and review each of the client files to see whether it meets the criteria and it passes, or whether there needs to be some remediation action taken. In any event, as you can see, there's a lot of opportunity for paraplanners in 2020, and I think that this will just further expand into the future. So as a paraplanning community, we do believe that most of those roles will continue. And as I said, we'll probably see some consolidation of paraplanning businesses in the future. That's my prediction for what it's worth, which will provide us with some larger teams again and some further opportunities there. In terms of the future state though, I wanted to pose a question to you. As I said earlier, there's a lot of talk about digitalization of advice and where we're heading with advice in this future state of technology. If I ask you this question, and maybe this will come up in the Q&As, if tech and digital advice is going to rule the world, who will run it? And I ask you this because who's running it now? If you work in an advice practice, who is the tech champion? Who uses the software most? Who is the person that everybody in the office goes to if they've got a query about the financial planning software or the tech ecosystem or the workflow or the processes? More often than not, it's the paraplanner. So I completely dismiss this idea that technology is going to replace the paraplanner, because the paraplanner is the tech champion in the advice industry. Excuse me. How are we going to replace them if they're the one that have the knowledge? So I think that you're, as a paraplanner, perfectly poised to take advantage of this advancement in our industry. Who else is going to be able to provide the content to support the advisors in making this work? Okay, so the third area that I wanted to talk a little about is the education and standards. And obviously at the Professional Paraplanner, this is what we do. We provide practical paraplanning training to help paraplanners be able to produce a statement of advice, right through from, you know, how they enter the fact find to how they edit the Word document. In the past, we didn't have anything in place. The only way a paraplanner could learn how to do what they needed to do was to learn on the job. So you can imagine that those paraplanners were really, I guess, either lucky or not. Sometimes they got lucky and they got a really good advisor who taught them a lot and gave them a great foundational skill base, and other times not so lucky. So their knowledge was only as good as the person who had sat beside them in the office and trained them. Fast forward to today, and I must say, in the last couple of years, I've been quite surprised by how much education or formal qualifications paraplanners have. So we still have the self-taught. And I have to confess, when I left Macquarie as a BDM back in the GFC, well, just before, lucky, to set up my first paraplanning business, it had been a while since I'd produced a statement of advice. And so I did pretty much teach myself in those early years how to do it. I was lucky. I had some great advisor clients. Gary Snell was one of them, and who guided me through this process. But we still have many paraplanners out there who are self-taught. We still have some who are receiving on-the-job training, and you'll still need that on-the-job training because every business likes to do things a little differently. But we also have quite a few paraplanners who have done a diploma in financial planning. Many have also done the advanced diploma of financial planning. I have a number of students going through my more practical skill-based training. Surprisingly or not, we are getting a lot of degree qualified graduates who are coming into paraplanning. I've had quite a few conversations with students at universities, and many of them are now saying that they have no desire to be an advisor. They actually want to come out of their degree and work as a paraplanner. In the communities that I am involved in, I've also seen a number of paraplanners with graduate diplomas and masters. If you think about it, paraplanners in terms of their skill set are by nature quite analytical. They do a lot of research. They strategize. They like that part of the role. That's why they're in paraplanning. It's quite conducive to study, and they're certainly not afraid of study. They enjoy the opportunity to learn something more and to get recognition in the form of a formal qualification. So I've really noticed that difference between paraplanners and advisors. Advisors do it because they have to. They're relationship people. You know, they need the bit of paper so that they can sit in front of their clients and help them achieve their goals, whereas the paraplanner actually likes the process. So what we're seeing currently is, once again, quite a mix of education that paraplanners have or do not have. I've also mentioned here standards, and we don't have any. And I've spoken about the role of paraplanning and how there's a huge disparity between what one paraplanner does and another does. And I think there's growing momentum coming from the paraplanners themselves to want to have a standard that they meet, because in doing so, that recognizes them at that standard and as a professional. And so that's something we're working on for the future. Standards in line with financial planners. If we as an industry are going to hold our advisors to a much higher account, to a higher set of standards, and it's out of scope to be talking about those standards today, but if we're going to hold them to a higher account and we as paraplanners want to stand next to them, to collaborate, to support them, we then need to be held to a higher account too. Now, I'm going to mention some things in this Beyond 2020 that are really my views. They're not necessarily based on facts. It's my observations, having worked in education, having consulted on education that is being reviewed on the RG 416 requirements. It's just my view of where we might end up, but I believe that there will be some mix of this that we'll see in the future. Compulsory professional development, that continuous education, the hours that the advisors do, I think it makes sense to introduce something like this for paraplanners so that we know that they're keeping their knowledge and their skills up to date. Learning and development plans. So we might see a scenario where the AFSL has a requirement to ensure that when they take on a paraplanner, they know what their knowledge and skill gaps are, and they have a learning and development plan in place to help the paraplanners learn what they need to in those gaps to bring their skill level to the required standard. This is a contentious one in my mind, only because I worry about minimum education standards in paraplanning for a number of reasons. Firstly is, does it limit the amount of paraplanners we'll have available, which we're already desperate for more qualified paraplanners. The other is, are we just adding another layer of cost to the advice practices out there? And my goodness, you know, I've been in the industry 25 years and I just don't know how much more we can put on the advice businesses in terms of costs. So I absolutely believe we need to be held to a standard. We need to continuously improve and learn and develop our skills if we're going to stand by the advisors. Learning and development plans are a great way to work with your employer on that. There is talk that we may end up with minimum education standards. I'm not sure that we're ready for that in paraplanning just yet, but watch this space. Accreditations might be another way to help employers know what skill set you have as a paraplanner. So accreditation might be in the professional paraplanner, for example, you have the opportunity to work through and become a super specialist and do a certification assessment so that you can then take that to your future employer or your employer and say, look, I've actually been through the professional paraplanner and I can do self-managed super fund SOAs, and these are the strategies I've learned. And I think that's a great value proposition for paraplanners. and also their employers as advice practices, as paraplanning businesses alike, to know what level of skill they have. Designations is probably at a higher level and more about recognition of that striving for excellence as well. Designations also have that ongoing professional development built into them, which, as I've said, is important. It may not be that everybody aspires to have a paraplanning professional designation, but an opportunity for the ones that want to, I think, would be great. And one of the things that I've learned in chatting to the paraplanning community is that they want to be recognised as professionals. They're some of the smartest people in the business in these paraplanning roles. And I think they deserve to have that professional recognition. So as you can see, there's quite a few developments that may be on the cards in this area. And I think that over the next probably year or two, we will see some huge inroads, which will be great for paraplanning as a profession. So how will we as an industry support you as paraplanners? And I think the AFA community of practice, the Pulse community, is a very good example of the change that we're seeing in the industry and how we are as an advice industry wanting to support paraplanners in the future. My business and my education of paraplanners is also there to try and help promote and raise the standards of paraplanners, upskilling them in their roles. There are some other opportunities out there. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of the Paraplanner Hub, which is a Facebook community run by Mel Drago, and it has over 800 paraplanners that are on there sharing ideas and collaborating and answering each other's questions. I know that in talking to many of the software providers, that they too are now focused more on paraplanning and how they can help them on their learning journey with technology. So we've really just started this process. I believe it's only been the last year or two that we've started to see some support, some community around paraplanning. And I think this will evolve further in the coming years, which can only be good for paraplanning as a profession. Now, I'm probably showing my age here, but there's some great one-liners from Jerry Maguire, and this is one of my favorites, and that is, help me help you. And certainly as an education provider, I feel like I can say that. And what I want paraplanners to do as a profession is start to look beyond I know it's hard because I've been there, but look beyond that short-term pain of, you know, I've got 2 days to turn around this SOA, I've got 3 days to turn around this SOA. I know a lot of you are in time-critical roles and it's hard to look past that short-term vision, but we need you to start prioritizing your development as a professional. We need you to commit to continually developing yourself and seeing yourself as a professional, so that we can promote you as a profession as well. I think that there's a lot of opportunity if you're not all over what's happening in the tech space at the moment, if you're not following all of the new software providers in financial planning on LinkedIn, you should be doing it. Jump on and start looking for some of these new businesses that are popping up in the last couple of years, and they've got some great tools that you could be using as a paraplanner. It also just gives you a vision of the future and what we're looking at. So make sure that you're doing those things, you're being proactive. Get connected, be part of the AFA Pulse community, jump on the hub on Facebook, go to networking events for paraplanners so that you can build a network to support yourself as well, particularly for those that are out there in the contract paraplanning space. It can be quite lonely. It's like advisors in their advice practices, sitting out in their office alone, feeling like they haven't got a lot of support. You've got to create that network around yourself so that you have the support and you can learn from each other. Okay, so I've actually finished up a little bit early, which I'm surprised by. I'm normally hard to keep quiet, but I think at this point I'm going to hand over to Rob, and he's going to help guide us through some Q&A on the session. So thank you very much for joining me today. I will just say, if you want any more information on the paraplanning education that I run, I've got my website there on the screen, and you can also email me directly. Thanks, Rob.
Congratulations, Kate. Thank you so much. That there was lots to cover here. We've got a number of questions, and I might just leap into them. And people are just keen for your opinion. First question is: so to what extent is there a danger that an outsourced paraplanner might not empathise all that well with a client or a client advisor relationship? So is it a good idea for a paraplanner to have experience within an advice practice as opposed, and I think the question is more around outsourcing. I think you were talking about typically overseas.
I completely get where they're going with that, and there's a couple of parts to that, but yes, that empathy for that client advisor relationship is important. And I guess that's why I said I believe it's best to get some experience in a practice first, because you do get more of an appreciation of that relationship.
Yeah.
The other thing I used to do with my paraplanning team was always encourage them to, as paraplanners, we can get in that habit of email ping pong, pick up the phone and speak to the advisor. We found that a 2-minute conversation with an advisor about their client gave us such a wonderful picture of the situation versus 10 or 12 emails. Perfect.
There's a question from a person online, and it's really around sort of career, but if a person had, so they're a mature age, a would-be paraplanner. I'm thinking mature age must be me. Sounds like me. Mature age with an abundance of capital markets experience, seeking to pivot their career. So they've got lots of experience in capital markets, but they're being blocked by recruiters. So recruiters are not being open to the idea. This person's saying just assume to do door knocking or tap into personal network. What particularly resonated with me, Kate, was what you were talking about at the back end of your presentation there. Have you got any tips for, say, this person who's getting blocked by that recruiter but has experience and wants to pivot into this career?
Yeah, absolutely. I've spoken to a few people in this scenario, and I guess the education that I do fits well with these people. My training assumes a level of knowledge in financial planning, so I'm not trying to reteach the formal advice education, if you like, but it gives them that practical skill set of being able to physically do the job of a paraplanner. The other thing that I failed to mention, which I should do, is that we are looking at setting up a mentor program within the professional paraplanner. And that's something that's come up on a few different communities for paraplanners, that they need that mentoring support, particularly if they are having a change of career in a similar field.
Yeah. A question here around which companies, I know you mentioned just at the end there, sort of immersing yourself in LinkedIn and following certain organisations, certainly with a tech bent. Is there a couple that you would suggest for the folks that are listening?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a line 20. I'm just, you know, I've been software in the past, but I'm not a line
Yeah.
20 software companies, just putting that out there. Nod, Nod has transformed into Nod Docs now, NODDOCS, I think it is. So they have a document creation tool that is a drag and drop that can now be configured into Xplan. And as we know, there's still 70% of users in the Australian marketplace using Xplan. So that's a great one, but they also have done a bit in the artificial intelligence space. So I like watching them because they come from a very tech background. We've also got IntelliFlow, so they're UK based.
Yeah.
And we saw at the AFA conference last year, bring a new concept to our market, which is very much in keeping with what's happening in the broader tech community. And that is true open API, where you can plug in lots of different types of software to different parts of the advice process. So there's two, I guess.
Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Got two questions here, and they're very, very similar. So I'm going to try and pull them together. A question around the FASEA exam, and do you think, just out of curiosity, do you think there's any benefit for paraplanners undertaking the FASEA exam? And without preempting that answer, and another person's asked, can you talk about support for paraplanners to complete the FASEA professional year? So they are slightly linked. You know, is there, and I think by the way that you've spoken today, you have said to people, well, I think the future state is here, and you know, these are the things you're going to do. So yeah, views on doing FASEA today and professional year.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's an interesting point, and I guess having spent so many years in paraplanning, I'm a little bit, and I'm going to speak quite openly, a little bit sick of tools and education and different things that are really made for financial advisors being redirected to paraplanners and dressed up as something for them. So I think if you want to become an advisor, if that's something that you want to do in the future, absolutely. You know, you would do the exam, you would do the professional year. If that's not your path, then it's not teaching you how to be a paraplanner. That professional year is more around, you know, client engagement and relationship skills. And yeah, so I guess there's a little overlay. Some paraplanners will sit down with clients. Some of them need AR status as well. So I guess it depends on the path that you're choosing, but it really is an advisor path. And yeah, I mean, that's my thoughts on it. Rob, what are your thoughts?
Well, if I was taking a leaf out of your book, to be honest, Kate, as I've listened to this presentation, it doesn't hurt, right, to walk a mile in someone's shoes. But I am inspired by the thrust of where this presentation has gone about creating, you know, a discernible pathway. But you know, frankly, FASEA is it's an important gateway for the entire profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, there's no harm. There's no harm, but could we create something that's more designed specifically for paraplanners? I think so.
Yes, I agree. Got a great question here from our good friend Jenny Pierce. Thank you, Jenny. Jenny's asked, is there a concern, more an opinion question here, but is there a concern that large organisations with a really strong fintech capabilities will take over the paraplanning sector and impact smaller Australian-based paraplanning services that support the financial advice sector currently? So do you see in the future some of these really large fintechs just getting bigger?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt they'll get bigger and they'll play an important role in our industry. I don't see them replacing paraplanners. In fact, I think what many of our current software providers have realized is that they need the paraplanners. So I don't see that, but I will say to that point, Jenny, I think as a profession, we need to move with this tech advancement as well. And in terms of paraplanning businesses in Australia, they're going to have to get on top of the tech game as well. And that's why I mentioned that we might see some consolidation in that space, because like advice businesses may not survive anymore with the one-man band, I'm not sure that those paraplanning businesses on that model will still exist in the future either.
Right. And another education style question, and this person's asking wondering whether there should be different education standards for an in-house to an external contractor, much the same as there is in bookkeeping, because in-house you've got a financial planner overseeing versus, an in-house has got a financial planner overseeing it. So do you think there should be two different standards?
Look, this is where we're currently consulting to PwC. Well, I am to PwC on the RG 146 requirements, which is probably a whole nother discussion. But, is it okay to have the AFSL as the one that meets the standards? If they're in the office with them, will that be okay? I'd like to think that we're better than that. Yes, I do think that there's different skill sets and responsibilities of in-houses versus contract. And so maybe that's more about specialization rather than saying I'm sitting in-house, so I'm going to rely on my financial advisor and not have to necessarily meet my own standards.
Great. A question around someone who's followed a pretty similar pathway to you, I think, Kate. They're a CFP qualified person, so they're on a leave of absence at the moment. Is there any reason for them to keep that designation if they're never returning to planning again? So, i.e., they're not going to be a financial advisor again. So, tried that, didn't like it, moved on.
Yeah, I'd like there to be another option for them right now, and there's not. Yeah. So hopefully that is something that comes in the future. So maybe don't make that decision just yet. Because I do like for paraplanners, as we do for advisors alike, having that component of continuous professional development. And yeah, and the CFP does do that.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think you did answer this question throughout the presentation, but I think it's worthwhile reiterating. If your main goal is to be a paraplanner and not an advisor, so it's person's wishing to pursue a career there, do they have to complete the diploma course from Kaplan? And I think when you were talking about the education standards, you went through that, but keen for your thoughts.
No, well, as it stands right now, no, they don't. There's no formal qualification requirement for paraplanners. It's all on the advisor. And I think, I've got a lot to say on this particular topic, but I think that we need something. Does it necessarily, is it in the form of the diploma, or is it just that we set some standards around paraplanners? I'm not sure, but at this point in time, you don't have to have anything.
Yes, as we know. Kate, I think we're drawing close to the end. In fact, we just got a thank you from that person who asked that question around the leave of absence. They're undecided, so they're going to keep that designation, and it's a very good idea until a decision has been reached. And I couldn't agree with you more. One of the things that resonated that you said, I mean, this is a very, very young part of the industry / profession, and things will change quite rapidly, I think. Kate, can I just register our thanks to you for putting together such a compelling presentation. I think you've taken us on a really interesting journey. I don't think many people would know about financial needs analysis, FNAs. I am well aware of them, but the evolution of the role, and I think it's always interesting to know where you've come from and to where you're going, career opportunities, education, qualifications, industry support. I think what sort of really registered with me, frankly, was the robots aren't coming. High quality, highly skilled professionals and people willing to put the effort in from a specialisation will be rewarded. I think your piece around, I think you said you're committed to being the best of the best. I think that's a really, an interesting thing to take away. Fascinating about the in-house versus contract Paraplanner. Having worked in an advice business for the last 8 years, I couldn't agree with you more that your in-house Paraplanner has a broad range of responsibilities, frankly, is the tech champion, and everybody knows that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he or she who understands the systems becomes so incredibly important. Thank you.
And that's, sorry, just on that point, Rob, I didn't mention, but that's another career opportunity for paraplanners. And I certainly took that path for a while. I went into software, and there's some amazing job opportunities there also. Yes.
And I also think that taking that slight pivot through to auditing and remediation work, I concur with you that we hope remediation work will be limited into the future, considering what the profession has faced into. Thank you for talking about the education standards. We all know that the two obvious ones being self-taught and on the job, but it's good to understand DFP, ADFP, right the way through to, as you talked about, masters. The future state, I think we're all heavily engaged in what that may look like. Minimum education levels, accreditations and designations. I think you're absolutely on the money. I loved your piece as you wrapped up, frankly, is, if you want to immerse yourself in this part of the profession and industry, you've got to, frankly, network. You've got to be part of the Pulse community and the Paraplanner Hub, for that matter, because those are the opportunities to network, meet like-minded people. And frankly, to that first question about, well, if recruiters are stopping me, well, there is a very large community here that you can talk to.
Yeah, so, absolutely. They're so supportive too, Rob. Like the paraplanning community, they really are. So jump into, if you're new, if you're wanting to get into paraplanning, jump into Pulse and the Hub, and you'll be amazed with the support you get.
Yes, I totally agree with that. So again, I'd like to record my thanks to you, Kate. Thank you for putting in this. It was an excellent presentation. I'd like to thank the community for, we had over 160 people registered today. So thank you so much. Thank you for participating. I wish you all out there a very good morning and nearly a good afternoon. Kate, once again, thank you from the AFA. You've been fabulous. Thank you
very much.
And good morning.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.